So now we're going to change gears a little bit and we're going to talk about attention and how attention is a process and a mechanism that allows us to have control over all those cognitive resources that we were just talking about in the visual system. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of the hardware basically that allows our brain to process information in the external world, we're now going to talk about attention, which you can kind of crudely think of as the software that selects certain bits of information. It's almost like a control system that allows us to control all those cognitive resources with attention. Now, why do we need to control all this brain power in our head with attention? And the answer is pretty simple, because in the everyday life of the real world, we live in a constant state of information overload. If you're looking at your phone or playing on the internet, you've got a bazillion apps screaming at you. If you're studying in the basement of the library, you might be trying to focus on what's on your laptop while ignoring the people who are talking around you. If you're at a party, you got to sometimes pay close attention to the person you're talking to and ignore all the chatter that's going on behind you. And when you're driving on the road, you don't want to get distracted by all the different things that are whizzing by you. You want to focus exactly on the road. And so if you take just an example like this, which is just Times Square, our visual system, there's a lot of different parts of our visual system that are going to get excited by this. Our FFA is going to get excited by all these pictures of faces. The PPA is going to get excited by the fact that you're seeing a whole scene. The EVA is going to be excited because it sees all the bodies. The VWFA is excited because, blowing the roof off Broadway, Memphis, Mamma Mia, I'm a PC and Windows 7 was my idea, all these different words. But it's just too much information for all those different bits of information, for all those different parts of the brain to process simultaneously, okay? You can kind of think about it that all these different parts of the visual system, the FFA, the PPA, the EVA, everything, they're all trying to be heard. They all want to be understood. They all want to have their voices heard, as it were. And the brain, in a sense, is like, this is too much. I can't process all of it at once. I can only take in a finite amount. And that's where attention comes in, to take that information overload and to distill it down to a more manageable unit, okay? So rather than think about this in the context of a uber complex scene like Times Square, let's think about a slightly more manageable scene. So this is actually an image of the waiting room of my lab from grad school. And it was a vision lab. So, we had weird spiral thingies in it that would allow us to twirl it and make people see motion after effects. We would actually always sign a champagne bottle or a scotch bottle if you got a dissertation. So, random odds and ends. Okay. Now, why am I actually showing you this image? Okay. I am not showing you this image to tell you about, the random lab I was in grad school. I've actually already hopefully proven a point about why attention is necessary. Because this image that you're seeing right now is not the first image that I showed you. When I first put this display on the scene, I very slowly started changing things over the course of about 20 or 30 seconds. Me drawing your attention to the spiral thing or the champagne bottles, that was actually to distract you so that you wouldn't notice the things I was changing, okay? Because if this is how the scene ended, this is how the scene started, okay? So the first scene that I showed you looked like this, and over the course of about 25 seconds, it faded to look like that. And so if I just alternate back and forth between them, you can see all the things I changed. I rearranged the pillows, I moved the rug, I removed that exercise ball on the left, I changed tons of stuff that's on the back shelf, I removed some ceiling tiles, all sorts of things. And if you don't believe that I actually did this, just rewind this tape and you can see that I did it. Show it to your friends, show it to your family. It works pretty much always. Sometimes people will spot a couple things. They might notice that I changed this or that or the other, but no one ever is able to process all the things that I get, okay? So this is a good example of attention selecting what you want to do a more manageable load. When I show you something as complex as that scene, when I show you something as complex as Times Square, it's too much information. You can't process it all. So what your brain does is focus on certain things and kind of factors out and drowns out all the other things, okay? So how would we then define attention? Attention can be defined as the cognitive process of selecting some information for further processing at the expense of others. When you were attending to that spiral ball thingy in the middle, you were selecting it for further processing at the expense of the ceiling tiles up on the ceiling, okay? And it's again because we have this information overload in everyday life, such as the library, the internet, the road, a party, and so on and so forth. So today or I guess in this part of the lectures, when we're talking about attention for the next couple, we're going to talk about the cognitive basis of attention, the neural mechanisms of attention, and then we'll spend a good amount of time talking about case studies about what happens to patients who lose their capacity to pay proper attention. You might think that it's going to then result in something like attention hyperactivity disorder. Oh no, it gets much more fascinating than that. Okay, so let's start with a very simple task to get a sense of the cognitive basis of attention, where what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little grading that's going to either be oriented to the left or oriented to the right. And so what I want you to do, I know if we were in class, I would have people shout it out in a more interactive way. Sorry, we can't do that. But at least in your mind, when I show you the little grading, just think about, is it oriented to the left or to the right? And just kind of try to respond in your head as fast as you can. So here we go. That one's oriented to the right. That one's oriented to the left. That one's oriented to the right. That one's oriented to the left. Okay, so now what I did there was I had that little red dot appear right before the grading came on. Let's see that one more time. Okay, I didn't tell you the red dot was coming. I didn't tell you I was going to do anything with the red dot. But my guess is that for most of you, you kind of moved your attention to where that red dot was. Okay, let's try here another case with the red dot. Ready? All right, so in that case, I put the red dot up here. And my guess is some of you hopefully felt the feeling of your attention kind of shifting up here and then shifting down there. Okay, so this is the simplest and first way that psychologists and neuroscientists started studying attention, which is basically what they would do is give you a cue to the location of where the target would be. And they would see how your reaction time, how the speed with which you could give a reaction varied as a function of the cue. So here, for example, this is a valid cue where I'm telling you, oh, hey, look to your right. And sure enough, you show me a target on the right. That's like the first red dot I showed you. The red dot appeared here, and then the target appeared right there as well. And what you find is that on a valid cue, you do pretty quickly, or around 200 milliseconds. On an invalid cue trial, you actually find what? You find that people are slower. Now, why would people be slower? They're slower because when you tell them to attend to the left, but then they need to then shift their attention back to the right, that takes a little time. Their spotlight goes one way, then they got to shove it back in the other direction. Whereas if it's a valid trial and you shove it to the right side and then you stay on the right side, boom, you're ready to go. What do you think is going to happen if it's a neutral trial? If I tell you, sorry, I don't have any information to tell you, it's going to be something in between, because you're not going to be thrown so far to the left and you're also not going to go so far to the right. It's going to be kind of, the Goldilocks problem, not too big, not too small, just right. So it turns out that advanced knowledge of the location improves performance. Why? Because you can shift your attention accordingly, okay? Now, attention actually comes in many different types, but there's two really dominant types of attention, considered bottom-up attention and top-down attention, okay? So what do I mean by that? So to give you a sense of it, what I want you to do right now in your mind's eye again, this is a great demo to do in class, because what I do is I have people clap when they see the target. But we can't do that as a class, sadly. What I want you to do is look for the target, which in this case is a vertical green bar, okay? So in your mind, just kind of think like, where is the vertical green bar? It's like a really simplified version of where's Waldo, okay? There it is. Let's try another one. Not there. There it is again. Not there. There it is again. Now, find it in this case. Now, if you're anything like me, it's going to take you a second to find, okay? It doesn't just kind of hit you in the face like it does with those other ones. Just so you know, the vertical green bar is here, okay? Now, let's compare it to one last situation. Find the vertical green bar again. Boom, it pops right back, okay? So what did you notice? How did the number of items affect the display? What about the types of items? There's usually a couple things that people notice. One, the number of items doesn't matter too much if the types of items are very simple. So if you have, 30 of these items, but they're all vertical and either red or green, it doesn't really matter if there's 50 of these, and it doesn't really matter if there's only, say, 5 of these, okay? So long as the types of items are relatively simple, the number doesn't really matter. Where the number starts to really matter is when you start to have many different types of items. So in this situation here, what you probably felt like was like your eyes and your mind were kind of moving around, like where is the green one, where is the green vertical one, where is the green vertical one? Oh, there it is. You had to kind of find it. Whereas in a situation like this, it kind of just popped out to you, okay? Kind of almost just immediately your attention was drawn to it, as it were. So this is an example of what's called a visual pop-out effect. And this is true with things like color, where if something is a different color than other things, it will just pop out. But this also holds true if something is a different orientation than other things in the display. It's also true if something is a different size than other things in the display, okay? With this one here, I'm not even gonna tell you what the target is, but in a second, I bet you'll immediately be able to find it because the target is the one that's moving different from the other things, okay? So the way that you can quantify this experimentally, sorry that the 119 is on the set size thing, I just noticed that, is you can look at how long does it take people to find the target, in this case a red circle, as a function of how many items are on the display in total. That's what set size is, okay? So in a situation like this, where it's a red thing amongst green things, actually it doesn't matter how many items are on the display. It could be 2, it can be 10, it can be 16. The speed with which you find it is gonna remain pretty much constant. But if you start to complexify things a little bit, so now you can't just look for red amongst green. You have to look for a red circle, but ignore the red X's. You have to look for a red circle, but ignore the green circles. If you have to kind of combine these things into more complicated ways, you do see a set size effect, where the more items you have to look through, the longer it's gonna take you to find it. If I only had, 4 items on the display, you'll find the red circle much faster than if I have 16 items on the display. Think about this if you're in a parking lot looking for your car. What are you gonna do? You're going to, in a top-down manner, shift your attention around until you find your car, okay? So this is what I mean by top-down attention. Top-down attention is this idea of you, the viewer, are willingly deciding where you're going to look out in the world. If you're in a big lecture hall and there's a guy giving we'll call it a chemistry lecture, you're gonna pay attention to him. You're gonna listen to his voice. You're gonna see what his hands are doing. You're gonna try to not listen to the other people in the room with you. You're gonna try to focus your attention here, okay? Bottom-up attention, though, doesn't work like this. Bottom-up attention is something that automatically just grabs you. When I show a display like this one here with the, the big circle, your attention just naturally goes there. When I showed you this one here, I purposely didn't tell you what it was gonna be because I wanted you to have that feeling of like, oh, my attention just went right there to that one like that, okay? So these are examples of, for example, bottom-up attention in vision. I wonder if you might be able to think of any examples of bottom-up attention in audition. There's usually 2 things in class when I ask this to a group of people that they can come up with. What are 2 things that kind of cause your auditory attention to kind of go like that and respond real quick? One thing is just things that are very loud, okay? So if you're sitting and all of a sudden a bomb goes off outside the room, if a car backfires, if someone screams, you're going to hear that real quick. If someone in the next room drops a cup and it splatters and it breaks, like if the glass breaks, your auditory attention will just voluntarily go towards it. Another thing that will also draw your auditory attention, I love this, is your own name. So if you're at a party and you're, talking to some guy and he's boring you, you're Shirley up here and you're talking to this guy and he's saying things like, then I said, golly, that's really great, because he's apparently from the 50s. You might be bored. And someone might say, oh God, Shirley's just the worst person. Even though there's all this chatter going on around you, you will immediately hear it and be like, wait, someone just said my name, what's going on? And then you'll even be thinking about like, oh, what the hell, Phil? I thought you were my friend. If he said something like, Tanya is just the worst person, that might not capture your attention because your brain is not as cued in on hearing the name Tanya, or really any other name, as it is your own name. Because from experience, whenever just someone says your name, you'll kind of naturally be drawn to it. I have an excessively common name. My name is Michael. My name is Michael Cohen, actually. So it's not uncommon that if I'm at a party, I'm in a group of people, there are another faculty member at the college that are named Michael. So sometimes there'll be meetings. I've actually been in cases where there are meetings and Biddy will be like, yeah, Michael. I'm like, Biddy Martin, the president. And I like panic for a split second because I'm like, oh crap, why did she just call on me? I didn't say anything. But it wasn't me. She was calling on someone else who was named Michael. Okay, so these are 2 examples of auditory attention at work. Now, there are, of course, certain costs to not having enough attention, okay? One of these costs comes from the fact that when I showed you a display like this, you weren't able to process all these things and you failed to notice when I was changing and altering all the different things out in the world, okay? So this is an example of a thing that's called change blindness. So let me show you another demo of change blindness. This one I didn't make. And what's gonna happen here is I'm gonna alternate between 2 images. So right now, nothing's happened. You'll have to take my word for it. This is a totally static image. But in a second, I'm gonna take it away and I'm gonna replace it by another picture that we'll call picture B. So it's gonna be a back and forth. Picture A, picture B, picture A, picture B, picture A, picture B, and so forth. okay? And what I want you to do is to try to spot the difference between picture A and picture B. Growing up, my guess is a lot of you at some point saw those like spot the difference books where you see those two things side by side and you got to figure out what's different between them. It's the same thing here. Something's going to be different between picture A and B. See if you can spot the difference. I'm going to let this go for a little while because it's usually pretty hard. Usually in class, I make people raise their hand as they notice it. It's always kind of interesting to make a little game out of it to see who can and can't notice it. Now, because this is the very first one, and you might be a little confused about the setup, the thing that is changing is the plane engine, okay? It is appearing and it is disappearing on a loop, okay? And if you rewind this video from the very get-go, it was totally appearing and disappearing. So you notice it now, but you probably didn't notice it right away, but sure enough, it was appearing and disappearing before. Here's another one. Let's see how long it takes people to find. It's very difficult to show these demos like this because I can't see people's hands raising. But I'll give it a few more seconds. Some of you probably have already found it. I bet some of you have not. In this case here, it is the shadow of the helicopter is appearing and disappearing. Yeah, so you can see that hopefully. And then here is another one still. This one is extremely hard. The first time I saw it, it took me like a legitimate 3 minutes to find it. I'm not going to sit here for 3 minutes, but I will wait for a little while. Is it one of the guys? Is it something on the boat? Maybe someone's appearing and disappearing. Give it a few more seconds. If you have found it, I resent you because you have better visual attention than I did, because it definitely took me a lot longer than that. What it is the horizon in the background rising and falling. It's rising and falling. What you can do, show this to some of your, if you're at home, show this to some of your family members, see if they can do it. There's a lot of demos like this, but this is an example with change blindness of you can see the costs of attention where, this is kind of overwhelming me. The fact that there are so many things out in the world and the fact that you can only attend to a subset of them, the cost is that you can't notice all of the things that are out there. And so you're easily going to fail to recognize things that are occurring right in front of you. Now, a thing that was really critical in that setup was that there was a gap between the images, okay? So if I go back and I show this to you, you'll notice there's a little gray gap. You see that gray screen that comes in between them? A thing I want you to think about is, imagine I did another version of this where there was no gap. What do you think would happen? What if I just changed something on the display, but I didn't have that little gap there? Do you think it would be harder to notice? Do you think it would be easier to notice, and so forth? So let me just show you. So here's another change blindness demo, and I'm just gonna change something, but I took the gap away. So ready, 1, 2, 3. Probably you just were like, oh, boom, it went right there, okay? Because without that gap, something will just automatically grab your attention. It'll be the sort of bottom-up transient signal that'll make you just kind of go like, boom, there was something over there just like that, okay? So it actually turns out that you can notice things if they change in front of you, so long as they happen kind of all of a sudden uninterrupted. You know, if you're taking an exam and then the person in front of you just raises their hand very quickly, you might notice that, okay? Let me show you some more examples of change blindness just because I think they are delightfully fun. So yeah, here, let's see another one that is gonna be unfolding over time. So this next one, some of you might have seen, but this is going to be an instance where I'm just going to tell you now, multiple things are going to change. So not just one thing is going to change, but a couple things are going to change. So do me a favor and see how many of the things, like take a nice look at this scene now, see if you can process and remember everything that's going on, and let's watch it and see if you can catch the things that change.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Okay, so hopefully, I bet a good number of you noticed at least one or two things that changed. It turned out that it wasn't one or two things that changed. It turned out that there were 21 things that changed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the same clip again, except we're going to see it from a different angle. This is the camera we were initially looking through before. We're going to see it from another angle so that we can see the changes going on at the same time. I'm going to mute this so I can just talk over it. All right, so it begins, and as soon as the guy moves, when things are off screen, that's when they do the changes. They remove the thing there, they change the plants there, they bring in a different bench, although that's pretty subtle. Notice that this is a bear. She wheels it out and brings in the iron guy. They rotate this. They change the rug. Here's my personal favorite. They bring in another old dead guy to lie on the floor. No one notices it. No one pays attention to the murder victim. There's probably some joke there to be made. I don't know what it is. But this is another great example of all the ways in which you will miss things as a function of change blindness and the limits of attention. I'm sure by now, actually, that I think about this, many of you have already had the thought that this is very related to the famous gorilla example from the inattentional blindness demo. As you probably know,
the monkey business.
Oh, geez. The monkey business illusion. I'm just going to talk over it because I bet you've all seen this. So this is one of these famous demos, just so we're all on the same page, where you want to count the number of passes amongst the white team. So 1, let's just do it together, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't really know why I'm counting out loud. We don't need to be counting out loud. 7, 8, and yet I just kept counting out loud. 9, 10. There it is. There's the famous monkey. So for most people who don't know that the monkey is coming, that guy will appear. He'll beat his chest, and then he'll walk off, and people will not have noticed that a guy with a monkey in a monkey suit came on. So if a person's paying close enough attention and they get that it's 16 passes, 16 passes? How did I miss that many passes? They will not notice that there's the gorilla. Okay, everyone pay attention to me real quick. Look up at me up here. Hey, here I am. Okay, the reason I'm showing you this video is that this was a video in which two other things happened besides the gorilla, okay? So you probably knew the gorilla was coming. Did you notice the two other things that happened? The two other things that happened was that when the gorilla walked on, the background curtain changed color, and one of the women in the black shirt walked off. So if I actually rewind this a little bit, and I replay it. So watch this lady, because she's the one with the blonde hair and the ponytail. When the guy in the gorilla suit walks on, she walks off. And when the guy in the gorilla suit walks on, the curtain goes from red to orange, okay? And the idea of what's going on here is that if you knew the gorilla was coming and your attention was directed towards the gorilla, your attention would not be directed towards that woman. Your attention, would not be directed towards the curtain, and you might fail to notice those things. I'm sure some of you noticed it, but whenever I've done this in big lecture halls, a majority of people don't notice it. Okay, so the last example of a cognitive effect of attention, which is, I think, my favorite attention story, comes from Flight Simulator. So this here is a screenshot from a flight simulator that was done by NASA. Oh gosh, when was it? I think the 90s. And this was back in the day when they were just inventing heads-up display technology. Okay, so this is technology that allows a person to be looking through the windshield and to see a thing that corresponds to the runway, the artificial horizon. It has some numbers about altitude or something or whatever, and I don't know. And at first, people at NASA were like, this is awesome. By putting this information up on the display, people are going to see more of the world because they can look through the windshield and see all these other things on the heads-up display at the same time. But then they started noticing, like, oh, darn, actually, wait, no, the opposite effect is happening. People are actually noticing less, and they're not even realizing they're noticing less. So on this particular screenshot that I'm showing you right up there, what ended up happening is these pilots were flying in this flight simulator. Again, it wasn't real life. It was a simulator. And on this particular run, it was a difficult landing, okay? The turbulence was high, the visibility was decently low. They really had to rely on these heads-up displays to maintain their sense of the horizon and so on and so forth. Now, while they were doing this and they were landing, what the NASA, I don't know, pranksters did is they rolled this big plane out onto the runway. And the people who were flying it just landed right on top of it. And this is the crazy part, they didn't even notice that they did it. So when they walked out of the flight simulator, they were like, you know, hey, good job, Chuck. Hey, good job, Phil. Should we go get a vodka? I don't know what pilots talk about. But the other people at NASA were like, yo, Phil, did you just realize what happened? And he's like, no, what just happened? It's like, wait, you didn't just see what happened on that last landing? It's like, well, I mean, it was a pretty rough landing, but we got the plane back okay. And they're like, no, you crashed into another plane. And they're like, what are you talking about? How could I possibly have crashed into another plane? So they rewound the tape, they showed it to them, and the two pilots were like, oh my goodness, if I hadn't seen the tape, I would never have believed it. Because the idea is their vision was so focused and attending so much on the heads-up display, they didn't even notice the plane that they missed. Now, a thing that's interesting is that you actually, with these heads-up displays, often see less than if you have to look down at your dashboard. Now, why do you think that might be? The reason that is that if you're, say, driving a car and you look down at your dashboard, you're kind of in your mind like, I'm looking at the road, I'm looking at the dashboard, I'm looking at the road, I'm looking at the dashboard. You're not going to, in your mind, think, well, like, no, I can see the road, it's right there. When you have a heads-up display like this, people will kind of have the false sense of like, oh no, I can see everything, I can handle it all at once, because people don't realize how limited their attention is. And so by putting that information right on the display, a person will just stare at it so intently with this false impression that they must still see what's going on behind it, even though that's actually not true. So a big part of the reason that there are not lots of heads-up displays in cars or heads-up displays in planes and helicopters and so forth, the technology exists, but it actually turns out that people are more likely to get distracted and get in accidents than they are when they have to shift their attention to another different part of space. Okay, so that is going to wrap up what we're going to talk about in terms of the cognitive basis of attention. I hope that gave you a clear sense of what attention is. And what we're going to move to in the next section in the remaining two lectures, mini lectures, is going to be talking about how attention operates in the brain, what it does to signals in the brain, what happens when you damage those attentional signals in the brain, and so on and so forth. So for the next section, part 5, that's what we'll talk about. All right.